All right. Hi, my name is Peter Blair. I'm a third-year professor at Clemson University in South Carolina. You may know Clemson as the national champions in football, and we're hopefully going to get there again this year. And I study primarily work in applied microeconomics. And so I have papers that look at residential segregation, papers that look at gender, wage discrimination in the labor market, and also papers that look at development economics. So those are the three main areas that I tend to focus in. The story goes back to the islands of the Bahamas, where I'm from. So as kids, we sold fruits and vegetables. We also sold these little cookies called mini packs. And there was something about being in the marketplace where we were buying goods, we were selling goods, we understood the notion of profit and loss and revenue. And that experience of selling those mini packs and selling those fruits and vegetables really showed me how economics could impact the lives of people, especially working class people like my family. And so that was the first thing that triggered me to think about economics as a profession. So one other piece of my story of becoming an economist was I was actually training to be a physicist. So I was doing my PhD in physics at Harvard University. And in one of my second-year courses, we were studying a model of quantum magnetism. And this model is pretty simple in the sense that you have all of these electrons that are arranged on a lattice. And so think about a checkerboard. And there's certain equilibrium configurations in which on a half of the lattice, all of the electron spins are aligned pointing upwards, and the other half are pointing downwards. And you have this domain wall. And I remember thinking, that looks a lot like segregation, this other side of the tracks phenomena. And so I started talking to sociologists and economists at Harvard, so Ed Glazer, David Leibson, and they started to point me in directions to look at papers in economics that studied racial segregation. And Steve Durloff, who's here at the University of Chicago, his papers were some of the very first papers in economics that I read. And after that, I really got hooked because I started to see how you could use the tools of economics to study questions that are very relevant to social well-being of people. So for the past 2 years at Clemson University, I've been working really diligently with my students there to develop the Blair Economics Lab. And the purpose of the lab really is to create an environment where students can come in and work on very interesting research projects, do excellent work, and learn the process by which they can become researchers. And so it's a very hands-on collaborative process, and I completely enjoy working with my students. The students at Clemson are a complete joy. They are some of the most teachable, hardworking students that I've ever met. And what's been fun about this experience is, in a lot of ways, it was very experimental because as a young professor, typically you will work by yourself or you'll work with other junior colleagues because you would have just gotten trained. But what's been amazing about this experience is that I've gotten to see graduate students start at the beginning of their training and blossom. And Bobby Chung is a great example of that. So he's the senior research student in my research lab. And currently he is a junior Prize 3 fellow at the University of Chicago. And that's a really big deal. He's our first student from Clemson to win that. And we're super proud of him. And Bobby and I started working in his second year on this paper that looks at the effect of occupational licensing on gender and racial wage gaps. And we find something really surprising, which is that in the presence of occupational licensing, that racial wage gaps are reduced and also gender wage gaps are reduced. And we were also able to uncover two separate mechanisms for this. So for the racial wage gap, we find that black men benefit a lot from licensing as a positive signal of non-felony status. Whereas for women, they benefit a lot from the human capital that's bundled with the license, because a lot of licenses require you to get training, to take a test, or to have some form of continuing education. And so in a lot of ways, this project with Bobby planted the seed for the Blair Economics Lab at Clemson. And that has really flourished. This work has been covered in the Wall Street Journal. It's being covered now by the HCEO, and we're super excited about the opportunity to talk with you more about this. But I would really want to focus a lot on just the power of these student-faculty relationships to unleash the potential of a student and to create research that could really impact the way that the profession thinks about important issues such as occupational licensing. So I'm really proud of Bobby and the kind of trailblazing student that he is, because so many of the other students at Clemson and in our research group look up to him as an example of excellence. And I know that he's in amazing hands at the University of Chicago with folks like Professor Durloff and Jim Heckman and Damon Jones and others who I'm sure he will connect with as mentors. It's amazing to be here sitting as a faculty member, because I remember the first time that I came to Chicago was for the inequality workshop that Professor Durloff and Professor Heckman host. And then they subsequently invited me back for another smaller working group session. And it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life, because I'm sitting there with 25 faculty members. Among them, you have Rachel Crenton, you have Steve Durloff, you have Larry Bloom, Jim Heckman, you have Gary Becker. And I'm sitting in this room just watching how they did research. And they were presenting a lot of papers that were working papers. And it was phenomenal for me to see this experience of all of these great minds iterating on their work. Because as a graduate student, I would read their papers and think, wow, these papers just came out looking brilliant. And what I saw was that it took a lot of work, it took a lot of input from their colleagues to have that level of brilliance. And I felt so blessed that they brought me into this experience to be able to see that. And fast forward to, it's now 5 years later, I have my own students, Bobby being the first student, and he's now here at Chicago having that same experience. We're sitting down here having this interview, and I'm able to transmit that to him. And there's something that's really special about this experience. And there's definitely something that's really special about Chicago too, in terms of its perspective on mentorship, where you can have someone like a Nobel Prize winner like Jim Heckman or Gary Becker, talking to me about my job market paper and like giving me advice, or being interested in what my thoughts are on issues at the intersection of race and economics. And in a lot of ways that empowered me as an economist, and I'm very excited that Bobby gets to participate in this here. And there are other students from our research group. So Ben Posmanek, he came to the inequality workshop last year, and I'm hoping that he'll come to the Chicago Summer School for Price Theory too. And so it's really creating this like rich symbiosis and like relationship between Clemson and Chicago. And to see that replicated for me so early in my career is just an incredible blessing.